Supergirl is the second film in James Gunn's DC universe, focusing on Millie Alcock as Kara Zor-El, aka Supergirl, as she travels across the galaxy on a murderous quest for revenge. Along the way, she teams up with Eve Ridley as Ruthie as they go after Krem of the Yellow Hills, and also face some assistance and also possible opposition from Jason Momoa as Lobo. And while the trailers seem to indicate that this movie is another James Gunn directorial entry, it was actually directed by Greg Gillespie, who is known for directing Lars and the Real Girl, Fright Night, I, Tonya, and recently Disney's Cruella. But as the marketing indicates, Gunn's fingerprints are all over the trailers and commercials, and you can feel his sort of personality seep through every frame. And I'm sure if you're watching this video, you've heard the countless reviews and tweets and various social media posts decrying Supergirl as the worst movie ever made. And is it that bad? No. But it's not necessarily great either. As stated, this is the second entry of the DC universe, and it's coming hot off the heels of Superman, which is a film that now everyone hates, but I still think is actually pretty great. There was a lot of pressure on that since it was setting up the foundation for an entire universe worth of content. And with this movie, there is less pressure, however, it is still in the early stages of its infancy, so a lot of eyes are on this to see if other directors can step up to the plate to fill out James Gunn's world. It is also important to note that this is actually an adaptation off of the recent Tom King graphic novel, Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, which is in my opinion one of the greatest limited series that come out in the last few years. Look, I know Tom King for some reason can't write Batman, but every other story he's written has been a banger, so I don't know, sue me. That story is full of emotion and full of color. It's essentially space true grit. And the side character in this film that I mentioned, Ruthie, is more of the protagonist in that comic book, with Supergirl serving as a primary plot element. Ruthie is the narrator, and her quest for revenge sort of builds out the emotional framework to which the entire story hinges. Here, Supergirl is the protagonist. And going into this, I was cautiously optimistic because I think that is a source material rich for a great adaptation. However, all the promotional material were really hyping up the Guardians-esque music and comedy and sort of zaniness. I don't know, I was really worried. Unfortunately, those fears more or less came true because the comedy is one of the weakest parts of this film. A lot of times there were jokes that just sort of fell flat and no one in my theater laughed at, and by that I mean 5 people that were in this big theater. Hey, I get it, you need humor in your 4-quadrant movie, especially one that has as much space zaniness as this one does, and I'm going to try my best to not make comparisons to the aforementioned graphic novel, but the zaniness was used as an attempt to balance out the heavy emotional weight that story had. Emotional weight that this film sadly doesn't really have. No disrespect to young actress Eve Ridley, maybe she's been better in other things, but her performance as Ruthie just didn't do it for me. And whereas in the graphic novel she was the central character full of different kinds of emotions, here she felt rather one note, and by the third act's emotional conclusion, I just wasn't connecting to it at all. But let's switch gears and talk about the positives, because as stated, this movie is not a complete dumpster fire. Millie Alcock is giving a great performance as Supergirl. The moment they announced her, I knew that she would embody that character very well. I guess the problem with it comes from the script, in which she's doing the heavy lifting when the work on the page is doing her no credit. You could tell that there is a lot of Star-Lord type influences that they put into the character, down to the point where she's literally listening to a Walkman. Yeah, this movie has pretty bad needle drops, but I'll get to that in a little bit. She was great, and I'm excited to see where her character goes. It's a very clear distinction from David Corenswet's Superman, and when he does appear in the film, the contrast is there. I'm excited to see where they go. By the way, can we just talk about how great Corenswet is as the character? Man, they really struck gold. Say what you want about the movies and the projects that Gunn has made decisions with, he has made absolutely sure that the Superman is in the right hands of a good actor. Jason Momoa is also a lot of fun as Lobo. I mean, he has absolutely no relevance to the story, and he's completely shoehorned in here to set up a spin-off show or a movie or something, but I don't know, he was having fun, so I guess I was having fun when he was on screen. And this movie actually did have color, for the most part. All the trailers were emphasizing lots of gray locations, but for at least the first 2 acts, there were a lot of reds and blues and greens, which I know is a weird thing to harp on, but when you look at 90% of blockbusters today, you start to notice when we actually get color, so that was cool. but all of the dazzling effects and sequences seem to grind to a halt whenever the villain Krem shows up on screen. Now look, I know we talk about bad villains in comic book movies, and I feel like a lot of people always want another Heath Ledger Joker or Josh Brolin Thanos. Not every villain needs to be Machiavellian and have emotional connections, I get that, but like, Krem is one of the worst villains I've seen in a recent movie. I also did some research, and apparently there was a lot of backstory cut that was going to give us something to latch on to, but here he just feels like a dumb henchman. He shows up, he does evil stuff, and I mean, sure, that can work in the right context, but when you have him being alongside a character who's kind of a flat piece of cardboard, there's just no dynamics here I care about, and the entire hook for revenge is just so flat and underdeveloped. I'm really trying here. I mean, look, I love the source material, and I want this universe to thrive, but I just don't understand why these studios keep undercutting their writers and removing crucial sequences to help build out the plot. And as stated, the first two acts looked pretty good from a visual standpoint, but the third act is absolutely atrocious. If there were heavy reshoots here, I can guarantee you they were mainly done during this final sequence. I'm talking about some completely piss-poor CGI, on top of, in my opinion, the worst needle drop I've ever heard in a comic book movie. Like I said, there's a lot of Guardians soundtrack type riffs, and there's even times when they're in an alien space bar, but they're playing Earth music, which just confuses me because how does a space bar have Earth music? Who even cares anymore? Ultimately, Supergirl is less of the base hit that James Gunn and DC Studios were hoping for. The film has dazzling action sequences, Millie Alcock is great as the character, Jason Momoa is entertaining as Lobo, but ultimately the story feels half-baked, the emotional core is lacking, too many jokes, too many music, and the villain is one of the worst movie bad guys I've seen in quite a while. Again, not the worst movie of all time, but certainly underwhelming, and especially in light of the great comic book that exists. By the way, if you haven't read that comic book, check it out, it's great. Unfortunately, it looks like the gun jammed. I'm gonna give Supergirl a C.